She then gives a classic, whoa.
Oh, hey, let's get it! Boston, Massachusetts, what is good?
Woo. It is a delight to be here in your city. I have not been here for a live show in like 3 years or something, so it's been a minute, but I'm glad to be back and talking about some fun books. Everybody ready for the show? Sweet. I am excited to have an early show as well. I didn't recognize this until I saw some of the people rolling in. I was like, oh, there's a bunch of like younger folks in the crowd, like a bunch of teenagers and younger kids. I just met someone who's 9 years old in the crowd. And I was like, oh, right. That's what happens when I have a show at 3 PM. Let's go. So I get it, especially as new dad, people are like, oh, you want to do something at like 8 o'clock? Be like, I'm sorry, you mean bedtime? No. So I totally get it. I'm glad that has worked out. And I'm very excited to bring this show to all of you. Now, we've got some important Percy Jackson stuff to discuss. So I think we should get right to it. And we have to bring on our guest, because I never do this alone. We have a very special guest, Boston's own Liam Crowley. Make some noise! Quite a long runway up to the stage. We're really going to get our steps in just from coming up and coming back. Thank you so much for coming through.
Do I do a special dance as well?
If you want to, you're welcome to.
Oh, no, Percy does the floss.
Oh, well, there it is. True to the show.
Hey, everyone.
So, what specific town? I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I'm going to
guess. Braintree, Massachusetts.
Yeah, Braintree in the crowd.
Yeah.
I was going to say Braintree, but I was like, that sounds too science fiction-y, but I don't know.
That's what most people say.
So we're going to be talking about 2 chapters of The Son of Neptune. We're going to be talking about chapters 7 and 8, which are both Hazel chapters. But before we get into that, I think this is your 3rd time for an episodic appearance on the show. So we got to ask you your question. What would your nectar and ambrosia taste like? So optimal food, optimal drink.
This was a hard one to ponder because there are a couple flavors that cycle through my life. It comes in phases. Right now, for food, I'm gonna go Nutella. I've been on a big Nutella kick lately. And then for beverage option, it's gotta be a good iced coffee. And since we're in Boston, a Dunkin' iced coffee to be specific. Yeah.
I'm glad the Dunkin' shout-out got in. That's good.
Of course, and it's better in Boston, too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
I can see that. Wawas are better in New Jersey than they are anywhere else, so I totally get it. Let's get into these chapters. Now, where we last left our heroes, it was the end of chapter 6, which was mostly the big old flashback where we learned about Hazel and the fact that she, was like from a way olden time, and it's still like exactly not 100% clear, but we got a little bit of like her mom flashback in New Orleans. She snapped back for a little bit to talk with Nico, and then they had to run to get back to camp because muster was starting. Chapter 7 opens with, quote, on the way back, Hazel tripped over a gold bar. So off to a great start. Things are going very well for Hazel. She was worried about being late for muster because even though Cohort 5 has the nicest centurions in all of Camp Jupiter, she would still get punished, and Roman punishments are very bad. They include scrubbing the streets with a toothbrush, cleaning the Colosseum bullpens, and, quote, getting sewn inside a sack full of angry weasels and thrown into the little Tiber. Wild. I wonder if this is some sort of like Roman myth thing. Either that or Uncle Rick is just like spitting on the torture fiction. But it's a wild punishment to have to deal with, and I would never want to do that ever.
Yeah, Camp Jupiter's no joke. I really like how they establish in Son of Neptune, when we're kicking off with the Roman side of this world that's been so expansive for so long, how do we establish that the 2 different camps have their own individual identities? We show kind of the rigorous, the vitriol side of Camp Jupiter, and you feel it right away.
Yeah, definitely feeling more intense. Now, at this point, I was guessing, okay, centurions, they didn't explain it yet. Feels like that's going to be cabin leaders, but we'll just have to see. And when Hazel tripped over this gold bar. Nico tried to catch her, but he just missed. Hazel scraped her hands. Nico almost grabs the gold bar, but Hazel stops him, and Nico almost forgot about this curse. He then gives her some nectar, it cures the wounds, and they both look at the gold bar and they notice that it's the size of a loaf of bread. It has a serial number on it, and it also says U.S. Treasury imprinted on it. And Nico asks, how in Tartarus? Which I love when they do this, like the translation of how in the hell? Like, that's always great. And Hazel says she isn't sure, and then explains that her curse removes valuables hidden or buried in the ground. She says that this bar may have migrated from the nearest bank vault. Quote, whatever's in the ground, anywhere close to me, it just pops up, and the more valuable it is. And then Nico finishes by saying, the more dangerous it is.
I know everything is rooted in mythology, so like there's a canonical explanation for why this makes sense. I just love when franchises get to this point to where you can go so absurd with the rules and regulations you established. Like if Hazel's condition was something that was brought up in like The Lightning Thief, I think readers would have been lost so quick. But now we're on like book 7 of this grand canon, and it's like, all right, bear with me here. Jewels are coming up from the ground and you can't touch it or else you're going to be cursed. And we're all just like, yeah. Makes sense.
Pens or swords, coins or javelins.
Well, pens or swords is like
early.
Very, very bare bones by comparison.
Yeah,
just keep going
true.
up. And there was someone you were telling me in the green room, obviously no spoilers, but the rules just get wackier. This book especially goes on.
Yes. So anyone coming to the late show, wacky stuff is going to come. So then Nico asks, should we hide this gold bar so that the fawns don't get to it? And the narrator, Hazel, imagines a scene of fawns getting torched by a mushroom cloud. And at this point, I have not really learned like the full extent of the curse, just kind of like bad things that were happening to those dudes in New Orleans. So I don't know how intense the curse is. That mushroom cloud of fawns is on the table, but ridiculous sort of situation. So very intense, seemingly. She explains that the gold bar should sink underground once she leaves, but just to be sure, she points at the bar, concentrates, and then it begins to hover off of the ground. She focuses her anger on it, which isn't hard to do given how frustrating the curse is for her life. And then the gold gets very hot. She makes a fist, and the gold bends into an enormous golden ring like it's Sonic the Hedgehog. And then she motions it towards the ground, quote, her $1 million donut slammed into the earth. It sank so deep, nothing was left but a scar of fresh dirt. And this is rad. Hazel rules. I'm very excited for Hazel. That's so cool.
And Nico's approval too, when he gives her kind of the like nod of like, whoa, that's pretty good.
He says that was terrifying, which coming from Nico D'Angelo?
But Hazel recognizes it too. She recognizes how that kind of validation from her brother means a lot to her. And it's fun too, it coming from Nico, because we obviously all know his arc throughout the core Percy Jackson books of being such like a lost cause, like a lost sailor trying to find his way navigating through Camp Half-Blood. And the fact that he's now in this leadership position where other people seek his validation, it's a nice checkpoints throughout his grand character arc that we all know goes on for quite many more books.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how the Nico arc develops. I do appreciate, like, this is just a very different Nico, and as these 2 chapters go on, we get to see a very different side of him, and it's very fun. We're not getting just like that brooding Nico. We're getting a new Nico, and it's very fun. Or at least we're just learning more about Nico.
And I wanted to add, too, really quickly, I don't know if you guys know that they have these in graphic novels as well. They're currently, I believe, House of Hades just came out in release with Wrath of the Triple Goddess. And so I bought Son of Neptune a while ago, and it stayed on my shelf forever. I never like actually read it. I just liked having it on the shelf. And so in preparation for the show, I was like, we'll do 2 mediums. We'll get the text, we'll get the visual. The way Nico is drawn in the Heroes of Olympus graphic novel is awesome. That's all I'll say.
Cool.
That's just encouragement to go read the graphic novels, support comics. It's great.
I'm very excited. I'll have to read them at some point in time, but I got other books to read first. So Hazel thinks that this is nothing in comparison to what Nico can do, but it does make her feel good that she impressed him for once as opposed to it usually being the other way around. Then the horns blow again and they rush so that they aren't late. Narrator Hazel says that even though she's been at the camp for 9 months, she still finds the assembly of the Legion to be intimidating. Not as intimidating as the first time, but it's still a sight to behold. The first 4 cohorts of 40 kids each stand in rows in front of their barracks on each side of the Via Praetoria. And the 5th cohort is at the very end in front of the Principia, since their barracks are in the corner of the camp near the stables and the latrines. I meant to Google latrines, but it feels like bathroom. Yep, yes, okay, yep, all right. A toilet or outhouse, okay. So especially a communal one in a camper barracks. Okay, so that's not great. I mean, we're learning more about Cohort 5 in these chapters. It doesn't really feel like they've been set up for success. Like, it is no mystery as to why they are not necessarily the most well thought of cohort in the camp. And I kind of want to know, chicken or the egg, like, we learned that they did some stuff that angered the camp. Did they then say, all right, well, now you have to be near the bathrooms? Or like, were they already near the bathrooms and they're like, oh, of course, the toilet kids ruined it again?
That's a really good point. I never thought of like the geography of their placement at camp as to whether it was punishment or it just changed after what happened with everything that was described as what we will get to. But yeah, this is like classic Rick Riordan story structure of establishing like this group, this character, this god is not in high place right now, and we're not going to tell you why. And we're going to slowly unravel, and then you start to build sympathy, and then we get the redemption arc and all that. And yeah, definitely rereading these chapters, it made me feel for the fifth cohort. And like, I want to see them succeed. And specifically, I want to see them succeed with our new characters, those being Hazel and Frank. Like, this whole situation has made them such rootable protagonists.
Totally.
Which, of course, you want to root for your protagonists, but still having that like level of sympathy, again, classic Rick.
Yeah, I'll get into it, but I think it's a different vibe, and there's something that's coming up that really, I think, makes that quite clear. So Hazel sprints down the middle of the Legion to get to her spot. Everyone is dressed for war, including chainmail and greaves. On top of their camp attire, they have sword and skull designs on their helmets, and they have leather combat boots with iron cleats. And in front of the campers are red and gold shields, which are each the size of a refrigerator door, which is big. And each camper is holding a spear that looks like a harpoon called a pilum. And then they have a gladius, which we've already learned is a small sword. They've got a dagger, and then 100 pounds of other equipment. And I'm wondering, why do they have so much stuff? Isn't this just their capture the flag? Like, why do you have 100 pounds of things? Like, even when I overstuff my suitcase ridiculously, I don't get to 100 pounds. I get I'm not bringing like plate mail and stuff, but still, 100 pounds of stuff in addition to the other stuff they've got? That feels like too much stuff.
A shield the size of a refrigerator door. This is why you travel on Amtrak, because you're not getting that through customs.
Yes. Oh, no. Traveling on Amtrak today was great. I got to fill up a whole duffel bag. There is so much more merch at the merch table than I normally bring because I didn't have to sit on my suitcase and zip it. I just brought a bunch of stuff. And then please buy it so that my back doesn't hurt as much on the way home. Now, also, refrigerator door, what's fun about that is that it's all relative, because you could talk about like a New York apartment refrigerator door, which is going to be a lot smaller than like a Texas double door fridge door. One of my favorite things, my sister who lives in Texas came once for the baby shower. She was like doing party prep stuff. She was in her apartment, you know, making like food, put in the fridge. And then she goes, "Is this the only fridge you have?" And I was like, what? I live in an apartment. Where would there be another fridge? Classic Texas. So in Texas, they have garages, and then they have second fridges in their garage. I know. Wild. And it's like just for beer.
I grew up with a garage fridge in Braintree, and now as a new resident to Brooklyn, we have one small one-door fridge shared by myself and 3 other roommates. So we're on a rotation of when we can buy groceries because it can't get overstuffed with 4 people's week-long amounts of food at once. So yeah, the shield, you're right. That refrigerator shield needs to be specified. Is that a New York refrigerator, Texas refrigerator, Massachusetts?
It could be wildly different, but they've got a whole bunch of stuff. I'm confused by it. Narrator Hazel says that simply walking around with all of this stuff is enough of a workout to get you into shape, even if you come to camp out of shape. Now, just as everyone is coming to attention, that is when Hazel and Nico arrive, so they stick out like sore thumbs. This reminds me of when I was a tour guide at Rice. I would always show up like at the last minute right before I was supposed to give a tour, and they would start at say like 10 in the morning, and I would get there at like 9:59 in 30 seconds when they've already like lined up people outside of where they give the tour guide, and I would be like longboarding rapidly through the quad, like jump off, kick it, catch my hands, be like, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm a mechanical engineering major and business minor, and I'm a hands at college." And then all the like 14-year-old boys would be like, "Mom, Dad, can we go on the tour with him?" Because you got to like pick based on whatever major they were. But like, I was very cool in that I was very late and not as prepared as I should have been, but it worked out. Anyway, Percy Jackson. So They stick out, and of course when they arrive, Octavian, who is the head of the first cohort, is smirking, and he's just looking very smug. And narrator Hazel also notes that he's got a dozen medals on his chest, so clearly not only is he in this important position where he's the augur and he's the head of the first cohort, but he's also clearly well versed in battle and does well at these war games.
Yeah, to go back to what I was saying about the rules being absurd at this level and us all willing to go along with it, the cutting open of the stuffed animals was one of those things. I read that and I was like, what are we doing here? But like, I'm kind of here for it. And again, another plug for the graphic novel. I have no relation to the graphic novel, by the way.
Yeah, we're not getting paid by
I'm just a very big fan.
We should be, but...
Very big fan of the visual medium. And the graphic novel does a good explanation of like, well, back in the day, they would cut open actual animals and like read their insides for prophecy or whatever. And that's the reason why stuffed animals. It's the classic Rick PG-ifying the situation.
Right.
Like with Dakota and the Kool-Aid versus the wine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's fun to kind of take those things that, you know, were so basically R-rated in Greek mythology and be like, no, how do we do it for a kid's audience and have it make sense? Here we go.
It's probably a fun challenge for Rick to have the more intense things and be like, okay, how do I make this more age appropriate and then also make it fun? Like, I'm sure it's a fun challenge. It's like when I'm doing these shows and making this podcast all ages, like I've not said curse words on the podcast. So it's more fun to like come up with like, what's a synonym? Like I bust out the mental thesaurus. Like what's a word that really conveys my emotions that isn't just like expletive? So it's sometimes a fun challenge when you have to do things a certain way for a certain audience.
My favorite example of that, any How I Met Your Mother fans in here? When they eat a sandwich, right? That's my favorite example.
Yeah, it's good. And when you're old enough, you might get what the reference is, but not yet. No, so Hazel is very upset at the blackmail threats from Octavian, and rightfully so, since he did threaten her with blackmail. She wishes to herself that anyone else at camp besides him was the one who learned her secret, but alas, it's him. Apparently he learned weeks ago, and he's just been keeping this information secret as leverage since it is more useful and more advantageous to him seeking power to have something as leverage than to, you know, embarrass her or tell people whatever. She wishes that she had kept the bar of gold from earlier in the chapter so that she could chuck it at his face. Great. Especially if she did the ring for him and then like, wah, the golden ring right in his head. Would have been great. Hazel then passes Raina, who is atop her Pegasus named Scipio, which goes by Skippy because he's the color of peanut butter. Now, if Raina came up with this nickname, I got to do a 180. I'm all in on Raina. If someone else came up with this nickname, I'm all in on whoever that is because that's a fantastic nickname for a Pegasus that I guess is tannish brownish.
This is also just classic Rick naming characters. Rainbow and yeah, Skippy, like it all makes sense. And yeah, Raina, you know, she's pretty hard-nosed when you first meet her, but yeah, she starts to show her humanity a little bit more.
We'll see. Yeah. Now, also by Raina's side are her two medallic dog friends that we met before, and she's wearing a purple officer's cape, and I'm wondering at this point, okay, what's the difference between an officer and a centurion? Are they the same? Are they different? We'll continue. She then gives a classic, "So glad you could join us," greeting to Hazel, and Hazel knows best idea here, don't respond, just keep going. And she knows that even though she's missing most of her equipment, she should just take her place in the lineup next to Frank. And now I'm realizing, okay, Frank is also in Cohort 5. I don't think that was necessarily said before. Hazel said she was in it. Now we've got Frank in Cohort 5. And narrator Hazel says that their lead centurion is a 17-year-old boy named Dakota. Now, Dakota finally gets referenced in this book. He got name-dropped at the very end of The Lost Hero when Jason all of a sudden was like, oh, right, I have 4 friends, and here are their names. There's 2 pages left in the book. Buy the next one. And on a whim, I had just guessed that Dakota was going to be one of the 7 because Kelly was just like, pick the 7. And I was like, Hazel and Dakota. So it seems like I'm going to be 50% right in those 2 guesses. But I'm glad that Dakota finally showed up. And he was just calling Hazel's name as she arrived. She is the last one on the roll. So technically, she wasn't late. So I appreciate it, sharing a kinship with her as a do things up until the last minute kind of guy. So I'm online with Hazel there.
I wish he had as much cool points as you, though. It didn't seem like people were ready to follow Hazel into battle, like they were ready to follow you on a tour.
We're going to learn about Rice University. Nico joins Percy, who's off to the side with a few guards. And Percy has clearly just come from a bath because his hair is still wet and he's wearing fresh clothes, but he still looks uneasy. And Hazel can't blame him. Quote, he was about to be introduced to heavily armed kids. So then the ghosts from before, they file in last, and the centurions sort them out. Octavian shouts, colors, and the standard bearers step forward. They have lion skin capes, and each one of them is holding a pole with their cohort's emblem on it. And the last to show a standard is a boy named Jacob, who is the legion's eagle bearer, and he has a long pole with nothing on top of it. And apparently it is a huge honor, but Jacob despises it, and we'll learn all the context of this later, but at least when I was reading this, I was like, okay, there was something when he met Reyna that looked like there was supposed to be something here and it was empty. Maybe this is that. Reyna insists on following the tradition, but every time Hazel sees the eagle-less pole raised, so clearly an eagle is supposed to be here, she just feels this embarrassment surging throughout the entire camp. And then I realized, I really don't know almost anything about this book aside from the cover, which does have a black-haired boy, which I guess could be Nico or Percy. No one say anything. But then also there is an eagle. So the three things I kind of know is like boy in snow place with eagle. And so far we've got our two boys, we've got snow place with Alaska being referenced, and now eagle. So I'm like, great, the cover over. We're good. Like, I don't have any more spoilers. I think I'm okay.
And is this like universally agreed upon by Percy Jackson fans as like the coolest cover that Rick has done? I feel like I've seen that like pretty much like people are like, this is it. This is one of one.
I think of all the ones I've seen so far, it goes the hardest. And it's just funny with like the books that I have for reading the books. I just have an assortment of used books, and some of them are paperbacks, some are the hardcovers. So I've had this one for quite some time because Kelly blew past me reading the PJO books and she wanted to get to Heroes of Olympus. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to buy them at some point. I'll business expense it. Here you go. So I got this like hodgepodge of the books, but that was one of them. And I remember just seeing this cover and being like, whatever that is, that looks cool. And now, a couple years later after buying it, I'm now getting to see. And I'm glad that we're only like 6 chapters in and the spoiler is gone, because the other one had our 3 friends flying on Festus, which was like kind of far into the book. Like the whole time Leo's like, is he going to get the dragon to work? I'm like, yes, he's definitely going to get the dragon to work. I've seen the cover of the book. So I'm stoked that I truly, from this point on, I don't know anything. Even reading these, I don't know who the next narrator is. I do now because I've prepped for the show that's after this. But at the time of reading, I was like, who's the next narrator? So anyway, Percy Jackson that we got to talk about here. So I'm thinking, I wonder if the quest of this book is going to be to retrieve the eagle. And then I realized, we've got a missing eagle, and we also have a missing Jason, the perfect American plot for our American boy Jason. We got to find the eagle and the eagle. Reyna then stops cantering on the Pegasus and addresses the campers. She gives a bit of an intro to the Percy Jackson situation for anyone unaware. It's a camp full of teenagers. Word has spread. But she gives a little brief recap for anyone who doesn't know what's up. Percy just waves and says hi. Fantastic, fantastic. And then Reyna asks Octavian if the entrails permit his admittance into the Legion. And Octavian says they approve. The campers yell, Ave, hail. And Frank was slightly late with his Ave, so it sounded like a high-pitched echo, which causes some campers to giggle. And once this happened, I wrote, okay, he's going to be the third narrator. There's no way this cute thing happens and he's not going to be someone we want to root for, like you were saying.
Yeah, it's the start of a lengthy arc. We have a whole book series to get through with Frank and these characters. Little things like this at the beginning, because I'm now rereading the Heroes of Olympus. So the first time I was reading the series, you don't pick up on those nuances that you're privy to on the second read. Mm-hmm. And like especially seeing little things like that, I'm like, Frank, I'm excited for you to like hopefully come into your own.
Yeah.
No spoilers, of course.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Narrator Hazel then says, quote, Reyna motioned the senior officers forward, one from each cohort. Octavian, as the most senior centurion, turned to Percy. So then everyone notes, okay, seems like officer and centurion are the same thing. One just sounds more Roman, but they feel synonymous, at least to me at this point. He asks Percy if he has any credentials or references. And Hazel remembers, oh, right, this is a thing. A good letter can get you into a good cohort, it can get you a good job, or it can help you avoid grunt work, like conjugating Latin verbs. That's not grunt work. That's fun. That's a great Tuesday. Percy says no. Octavian makes a judging face. Hazel wants to protest, and then Octavian asks if any legionnaires will stand for Percy. Frank volunteers and explains that Percy saved his life, but then people begin to grumble, and Reyna makes it clear that the reason for the grumbling is because Frank is on probation, and I forgot that he was on Probatio. And I wrote a notice, did we learn what he did yet? And we didn't, but we'll get it soon. She does drop a juicy mortal in her scolding of Frank, though. Frank hasn't been claimed yet, which is very interesting. It's been a little bit since we've had I wonder who this person's parent is going to be, because I feel like the Piper and Jason and Leo reveals were pretty early on in The Lost Hero, so it's fun to kind of have that revisited.
Yeah, and those reveals were, I'd say, pretty obvious. Like, I feel like I could have picked out who their parents were going to be. I don't think I knew who Frank's parent was going to be before the reveal. I don't think I had a very solid guess, which is awesome because it's so rare that happens in these books. I remember, cheap plug, when I talked with James Bobin, who directed the first 2 episodes of season 1, and I was talking about the reveal of Percy getting claimed at the end of episode 2, and he was like, well, it's obvious, right? I mean, he's the son of Poseidon. We got the trident in the logo. It's like, yeah, and of course, there's moments where you can't have that shock value. And I love that even now, 7 books into this canon, Rick still finds new ways to deliver genuine shock value.
Yeah. I'm very excited to see what ends up happening with Frank's claiming, but it was good because you're totally right. At least some of the other times, like Jason gets struck with a bolt of lightning. Percy makes water move around like multiple times. Some of them are pretty simple, but this one, not easy to guess. Now, the final note is that he, and therefore anyone, cannot stand for another camper until he has his first stripe. Frank is incredibly embarrassed, but then Hazel steps up because she doesn't want to leave him hanging, and she explains that Percy saved both of their lives, so she will stand for Percy as a full member of the Legion. Frank appreciates this. The other campers still grumble because she's only barely eligible since she only has just 1 stripe, and she earned it within the month, and narrator Hazel tells us that her act of valor was mostly an accident. And it also doesn't help that her dad is Pluto, and she's in Cohort 5, 2 things that don't have good reputations at the camp. So Reyna scrunches her face and looks to Octavian, who gives a look of amusement in return. And Hazel thinks that he ought to just do it. And I'm thinking, just put him in Cohort 5, because it will make Percy less of a threat, and Octavian likes to put all of his enemies into one place. So this dude is on full-fledged abuse of power mode. Like, I had already worried that he's not being fully truthful about the Jason situation, because clearly he wants to win this election. But now with this, like, he's truly trying to manipulate and pull strings and marionette puppet it, and it feels very Dolores Umbridge, where, like, I already really dislike this guy, but I could see this guy being more hated than whoever, like Gia or whoever the other villain ends up being in this one, because there's something about the, like, abuse of power angle that's more frustrating, because I think it feels more real to us. We've all dealt with someone with an abuse of power type of situation. We haven't all dealt with Mother Earth coming to life and trying to defeat us.
Yeah, thank you for using the word hate with Octavian, because I hate Octavian. Like, I hate this character. Like, there's shades of gray in so many of the other villains. Like, I'm a bit of a Luke defender, I must admit. Like, I love that character. I love his layers. I honestly like a lot of his mission statement against the gods in the first 5 books.
He's got some things right. It just goes about it in the worst way possible.
Good thesis statement, bad body paragraphs. It's
right.
Like,
you read the first page of his essay and you're like, okay. And then paragraph 1's begin. It's like, okay, so I'm going to team up with the Lord of Time. You're like,
His bibliography is not good.
His agenda slide on the PowerPoint. Great. Slide 1 proper.
Yeah, but on the flip side, Octavian sucks. And I hate Octavian.
I'm really excited to have just like a universally hated character that we can all despise together, because what better way to bring people together than mutual hate over the same person?
And also, I want to add, too, he's not just like a villain for the sake of like a mustache twirling villain. You understand where he's coming from, like all good villains, but no part of you empathizes with where he's coming from.
That's a good point.
So that's why it's like, it could be so easy for Rick to write characters super black and white of like, these are our heroes, these are our villains. And like, we see Percy's got shades of gray within him. We see Annabeth have shades of gray within her, quite literally, right? Titan's Curse. And so it's cool that Octavian, like, I would not call him a black and white character. I would still say he exists somewhere in like a layered context.
Right.
But you can still go down the checkpoints of his characteristics and be like, awful person, awful person, awful
Yeah,
person.
he's layered. It's just every layer is bad.
Yes.
Raina approves of Hazel standing for Percy and asks if her cohort accepts him. And the narrator, Hazel, says, quote, "The other cohorts started coughing, trying not to laugh. Hazel knew what they were thinking. Another loser for the fifth. And you dolts, you just wait until you learn who Percy Jackson is. Gosh. What a bunch of jerks." Now, previously, I had praised this cabin system thinking that it's better to have like diversity in terms of the different godly parentage. But this is also a terrible system. The only way that could work is if it's randomly assigned. That is what all of the cabins and everything should be, because now you do have the benefit of the diversity of different godly parents and stuff, but there's just too much politicking going on. If, one dude can pick what cohorts people go in, or like certain people have to stand up for certain people, like you're going to get into a lot of situations where a certain group isn't going to want to take a person. Like this feels more like proper sorority fraternity stuff, where it's like very self-selective, even though anyone can try to, I don't know how. Bryce didn't have a real Greek life, so I don't know how it all works, but like it just feels like this is going to be, you're going to get more homogenous groups, even if they're from different godly parentage. It seems like they're going to have their vibes, which I guess works for a book, but in terms of me thinking of like the logistics of Camp Jupiter, we got to solve this problem. This isn't good. They're also not doing it right.
It's also funny because it's Greek life in a Roman camp.
Oh my God, you're right.
Like, it makes, I don't know, that kind of system, maybe they're not as different as they think they are.
Oh my gosh, yeah, geez, gross. Anyway, Frank pounds his shield on the ground. The other members of the fifth join in, though they don't have much enthusiasm. You fools! But honestly, this is so fun. Like, it's so fun in contrast to The Lost Hero for us to be the smarty pantses that know everything that's going on and being like, oh, they'll learn. Cohorts 5's Centurions, Dakota, and Gwen give Percy a look of, here we go again, but Dakota accepts Percy on behalf of his cohort. Raina gives Percy a look of pity when she informs him that he is on Probatio. So I'm like, oh, he has to deal with this too? Boo. And he will be given a tablet with his name and cohort, and in 1 year, or once he completes an act of valor, which I'm assuming will be at the end of the book, he will become a full member of the 12th Legion Fulminate, and her little explanation ends with, quote, "Serve Rome, obey the rules of the Legion, and defend the camp with honor. Senatus populesque Romanus," which is SPQR. The Legion cheers, echoing it, and then narrator Hazel says, "Raina wheeled her Pegasus away from Percy like she was glad to be done with him. Skippy spread his beautiful wings. Hazel couldn't help feeling a pang of envy. She'd give anything for a horse like that, but it would never happen." Horses were for officers only, or barbarian cavalry, not for Roman legionnaires. So she's for sure getting a horse. I don't know which horse she's going to get, but this does open the door for, is Blackjack coming back in this book? Ooh, could be very fun. And I'm just going to look at my notes and not at anyone's face, because I don't want any spoilers, but if he comes back, it'll be so fun. And it would also be so fun if Blackjack is the one who spoils the whole plan of keeping Percy's secret. Like, Blackjack comes in to save the day, and it's like, yo, boss, what's going on? Why is your shirt purple? What's the deal? Like, it just gives the entire backstory. Yeah, your dad's Poseidon, and all. Oh, it'd be so funny if he just completely blows it. Raina alerts the campers that they have an hour for dinner, and then they will meet on the field of Mars for war games. Cohorts 1 and 2 are defending. Cohorts 3, 4, and 5 are attacking. Then they all cheer. There's a bigger cheer for war games starting than there was for SPQR, which I think is funny because they're basically saying, like, we like you, new guy, but we like food and beating the crap out of each other way more than you. What's interesting to me is that there isn't more of a positive reaction for Percy being on the cohort. Like, what he did to get into the camp was still very impressive. Like, didn't other people see him control the river, defeat the Gorgons, all this kind of stuff? Like, people saw all of this and they're going, nah, this guy's a loser. What are you talking about? This guy seems cool. I guess it's all going back to the Neptune angle of why they don't like him, but I don't know. He feels like someone you would want to have in the cohort. I don't understand.
Yeah, there's also the echoes of like what happened in The Lightning Thief when he was introduced to Camp Half-Blood, because sure, people like praised him and was like, this is the guy that defeated the Minotaur, but then you have like Clarice and people from the Ares camp who were just like, we're intimidated by him, but we're also not going to show that we're intimidated. We're just going to like belittle and try to bully him. So I feel like Ares is arguably the god that is most aligned with Camp Jupiter because of like how hardcore he is. Sure. And it seems like that method is everywhere in Camp Jupiter. And so I feel like a lot of those campers echo that. And I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked because when you mentioned blackjack possibly coming in and like spoiling everything, it made me think of, do you guys remember the Drake and Josh Save Christmas movie? When Crazy Steve comes in and he's like, make sure, Drake and Josh, you guys do this charity work because you're not doing it out of the kindness of your heart, but because you have to do it to get out of like jail time. And that just made me think Jerry Trainer should really voice blackjack. In the Percy Jackson show.
Okay.
I think it would be awesome.
I'm very excited to see whoever they pick for it. My personal pick would be Jack Black to be Blackjack. Would just be you gotta be so fun. So Hazel then waves at Percy, who is making his way through the crowd alongside Nico. And Nico says, good job, sis. That took guts standing for him. And I thought, did it? He's clearly an asset. But then we will learn why it actually did take guts. She notes that Nico has never called her this before, and she wonders, oh, I wonder if that's what he called Bianca. Does he like me now? Percy is given his Probatio nameplate, and then I recalled, oh, right, Frank had one of these. This makes sense. He strings it on his necklace with the beads, and I'm very glad that I've never seen someone cosplaying with that, because if I had seen that, I would have been like, why is there a square and a bunch of beads? So I'm glad that that never happened. And now I got to wonder, because I've got the beads there, and then I'm going to make beads whenever I do like Heroes of Olympus and stuff too. And I wonder like, ooh, should I also make like a Probatio thing? How am I going to do that? Like him just doing the simple act of putting it on the necklace had me very intrigued in a lot of different directions. But then Percy thanks Hazel and asks, what does standing for me mean? And she says, quote, I guarantee your good behavior. And I was like, ooh, for Percy? Ugh. I teach you the rules, answer your questions, and make sure you don't disgrace the Legion. And then Percy goes, and if I do something wrong? And she says, then I get killed along with you. Hungry? Let's eat. So yeah, that actually is very brave of her. I stand fully corrected. That is high stakes, especially for our boy, Percy. Hopefully no one at this camp is similar to Mr. D. But that is the end of chapter 7, which I have retitled, I Unintentionally Rob a Bank, hearkening back to the stealing of the gold bar early on. Do you have a retitle of chapter 7?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I can top that. One thing I was going to say on the Hazel and Nico front, just kind of echoing what I said earlier about how great it is to like have his approval mean something. Mm-hmm. The sis line is great. And it's also funny too, because Bianca in the grand scheme of things is such like her page time, her screen time, and the whole series is so minimal. Right. Yet here we are, book 7 into this grand franchise, and her impact is still prevalent. Yeah. And I think that's awesome because if and when, knock on wood, God willing, we get to season 3 of the TV show, whoever they cast as Bianca, like, sure, you might only be around for a season, but like your impact within this lore is going to be like eternal. So that's awesome. I don't think I have a better title.
That's fine. All good. We will now move on to chapter 8. We'll do a little bit of that before we break for intermission. So chapter 8, also called Hazel, we'll retitle it. It begins with, quote, at least the camp food was good. Good. I'm glad the food is good. That's very important to me. It continues, and the food scene is very fun. It says, quote, invisible wind spirits, Ori. And I was like, like, we don't know what that means. We've all read The Lost Hero. We love Melly. Ori waited on the campers and seemed to know exactly what everyone wanted. They blew plates and cups around so quickly the mess hall looked like a delicious hurricane. If you got up too fast, you were likely to get beamed by beans or potted by a pot roast. And that's just a fun way because beamed by beans, like that does make sense. Like bean is another thing for like if you get hit with like a baseball or something like that. But I don't think potted by a pot roast actually means anything. So you're just kind of like, okay, yeah, I see what he's doing. And it's just a fun visual to imagine, a big pot just like clonk hitting you in the face. Now, Hazel orders shrimp gumbo, which is correct. Percy has a cheeseburger and a bright blue soda, and he says, this makes me happy, but I don't know why. I love it. I love it. Narrator Hazel then says, quote, just for a moment, one of the Ori became visible, an elfin girl in a white silk dress. She giggled as she topped off Percy's glass, then disappeared in a gust. And I found that very interesting. I don't know if this person is going to come back. I don't know if the Ori just like know what's going on. But when this happened, I was like, wait a second. That was a very short little thing, but it felt big. And I'm just kind of like mentally earmarking it for the future. Narrator Hazel notes that the mess hall feels a little louder tonight, and she gives the detail that they eat, quote, Roman style, which is sitting on couches around low tables, which sounds fun. There's lots of kids moving spaces, going from couch to couch, chatting, gossiping, etc. And as is custom, the 5th cohort takes their place of least honor in the very back of the dining hall. And I know this is a book, and their triumph will be cool, but this continual bad setup for Cohort 5 feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course Cohort 5 is going to suck. Their cabin is in the bathroom. They're eating inside of the kitchens. I'm imagining their couches have like springs poking up. They're actually futons. Like, I'm sure everything is terrible. Maybe you need to set them up for success better.
It's a good point. The one thing I wanted to go back to is Percy's meal. Obviously, the blue beverage, we all know what that comes from. I'd like to think in my head canon, cheeseburger is like a callback to A God Buys Us Cheeseburgers.
Oh, totally. It's an
Aries,
anti-M
like
one.
That's a huge turning point for him as a character.
One either. Yeah.
Aries is the one.
Oh, I was thinking anti-M cheeseburgers, but there's also the Aries cheeseburgers.
Yeah, God buys. Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Everything, within the Lightning Thief, those 2 chapters in particular are huge for his arc.
Totally.
Like, anti-M is the first checkpoint on that quest. It's his first time being faced with monsters on an actual quest.
Right.
And then with confronting Ares, I believe that's his first time confronting a god, if we don't
think
count
so.
Mr. D.
Yeah.
Like, outside of camp. Yeah, in my head, I'm like, okay, cheeseburgers, Percy associates with, like, the beginning. Honestly, this is the beginning of his time at Camp Jupiter. It's almost a way of, like, continuing to echo this idea of newcomer starting again, this time having that hero within you, but just not remembering how to access it and just it coming out at fight or flight moments.
Yeah. And it's also, I guess, like if you are thinking of his ideal meal is a cheeseburger without steaks. Like, yes, steak, but not like steaks. You know what I mean? Like a cheeseburger that he can just eat and then that's the end of the story. That's his ideal situation. So within the cohort's position of dishonor, Hazel's table in particular is usually the least cool and most empty, but it's got more people here today. So it's her and Frank who are the normal people at this table, but now we've got the additions of Nico, Percy, and then Dakota, but mostly out of obligation. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, now we have, because you were saying this earlier, like, we want to root for them. This is something that we've seen even with Percy when he's, like, not deemed as cool. But it was, like, never really believable. Like, even when I was reading the first 5 books and they're like, oh, people at the camp didn't like Percy. I'm like, he's saved the world multiple times. I think people like Percy. This genuinely feels like classic high school stakes of, like, Frank and Hazel are losers. Like, they are true in the eyes of the other campers. They are actually the uncool, awkward, ew, don't sit near us, you can't sit with us kids. So I think it's more believable, and I think for them to overcome the burden of not being well-liked to then saving the day will be awesome. So I think that this growth arc is going to be even better than we saw with Percy, who was like, quote-unquote, not cool at Camp Half-Blood.
Yeah, and it's also funny, too, because like as you were saying about no one even knows who this Percy guy is. Like, you don't know, like, the resume that this guy has, what he's done over the past, 5 years and all that. Same with Nico. Like, these 2 characters sitting at this table, which is, like, pegged like the losers table, Misfits Island and that kind of stuff, is hilarious because it's like, if you just knew, if you just knew the context.
If you only read the first 5 books. Narrator Hazel then says, quote, Dakota reclined glumly on his couch, mixing sugar into his drink and chugging it. He was a beefy guy with curly black hair and eyes that didn't quite line up straight, so Hazel felt like the world was leaning wherever she looked at him. It wasn't a good sign that he was drinking so much so early in the night. And I just wrote, I mean, it's not booze, right? And then we'll get into it. Narrator Hazel then says, so, and then Dakota burps, waving his goblet, and says, welcome to the Percy party. Party, Percy, whatever. And then I wrote, is it booze? What's going on? Percy quickly thanks him, but then immediately turns back to Nico and asks, hey, can we get back to talking about how I definitely know who you are? And Nico replies, sure, but too quickly. And then immediately adds, I spend most of my time in the underworld, so that's probably the only place you could have run into me, so probably not. You don't know who I am. Dakota tells Percy that Nico's title is, quote, ambassador from Pluto, but then says that Reyna just doesn't really know what to do with him whenever he visits. And he says that Reyna's face when Nico arrived and told her to take Hazel in was a sight to behold. And I'm wondering, how long ago did Nico learn about the prophecy? Because it seems like he's been trying to facilitate this, obviously with Percy, but I wonder if his facilitation goes all the way back to Hazel. And it's kind of like a Hera thing where he knows that someone's got to do something. Like, he thinks Hazel's going to be one of the 7. So at this point, I'm wondering, like, okay, how far back does the Nico knowledge of it go? Nico says that Dakota was helpful back then by standing up for Hazel, and Dakota plays it off all humbly, saying that Hazel looked like a good kid, and he was proven right last month, quote, when she saved me from, and I wrote, no, Dakota, I do not know, please tell us. Frank takes a look up from his fish and chips. Frank, what are we doing? Frank, fish and chips in California? Frank, come on, man.
You're specifically dissing Californian fish and chips.
No, I'm also dissing fish and chips. And I guess maybe in Boston is probably better. And I really shouldn't. My thing with fish and chips is I just think it's so funny that it's like Britain's national dish. I know their actual national dish is chicken tikka masala, which is cultural appropriation, but they're like unofficial whatever, like most popular one is fish and chips. I'm like, that's just chicken tenders with fish. Like, are you a child? The nation of England? Come on. So no, I'm sure fish and chips here are like actually good.
Cape Cod especially.
Okay.
Shout out Cape
Good
Cod.
to know. I did have a crab roll from James Hook & Co. Okay. I don't know. It was good. It was expensive, but I had a crab roll and it was great. Anyway, fish and chips, I'm sure it's fine. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea.
Chapin's Bayside in Dennis, Massachusetts. If that rings a bell to anyone. Definitely.
If not,
put it on the
make
list.
a pilgrimage.
Next
Go,
summer.
go, go. So Frank looks up from his fish and chips and says that Percy should have seen Hazel's stripe-earning moment. He says the unicorns were stampeding. Hazel jumps in to say it was nothing. Frank pushes back, citing that Dakota would have been trampled if not for her stepping in and shooing them away. And I know that this probably took place at the camp, but the only thing I could envision in my brain was the scene from The Lion King, except Hazel came in and was like, ah! And then they went zoom over to the side instead. Hazel doesn't love when the story comes up, and Frank tries to make her sound like a hero because she was mostly trying to protect the unicorns, not Dakota. And the reason she was able to help out here is their horns are made of precious metal, silver and gold, and she was able to focus and steer them back into their stables. And yes, it allowed her to become a full Legion member, but it also began the camp questioning her powers, which she didn't like when this happened back in New Orleans. She doesn't like this happening now, so not necessarily her crowning achievement that people would think it would be.
I do love when this stuff happens too, like the narrative technique of taking a character's powers and making it practical. Like the practical explanation of like, well, the horns are made out of jewels. That is why she can manipulate them too. And it's also a great, like, that's a fight or flight moment. That's her showing like a taste of her full strength, because we saw how much concentration she needed to focus earlier in chapter 7 just to get that one piece of gold out of the ground. And you can only imagine like a herd of unicorns, what that takes. But honestly, like in those moments of fight or flight, sometimes it feels like they're described as not necessarily breaking a sweat. And that is what makes Camp Jupiter be like, who is this person?
Yeah.
And that was really cool.
Yeah, it's cool. And I think this is a great note to end the first act on, because we're about to get into like Nico, Hazel, Bianca backstory. So let's take a quick break for intermission. First, let's all say goodbye to the podcast people, because we'll take our mid-roll break, the Son of Fortune, now. So let's all say goodbye to the podcast people. Goodbye, podcast people. Hello and welcome to the Son of Fortune Houston edition, specifically Kelly's younger brother's childhood bedroom edition. We are at Kelly's parents' place for the holidays, and I found the one room that doesn't have a baby sleeping in it, and I'm going to record the mid-roll break here for this episode right before the holiday season. So got some updates and stuff. First, speaking of the holidays, if you're looking for a last minute, oh my goodness, I need a gift and I can't wait for any sort of shipping time, you've got some options thanks to the newest Olympian. You've got Patreon, where you can gift a membership where people can get access to cool things like bonus episodes and episodes without ads and bonus videos. I've been filming a lot of the live shows. I've just been putting up my nice camera on a tripod and then putting the video up from that live show days in advance of when the actual episode comes out. So you can get a preview, you can see the show. There's a lot of fun stuff going on the Patreon, and you can gift a Patreon membership. I have info about how to do that on the TNO Patreon. You also can go to the TNO merch store, thenewsolympian.com/merch, because some of our items there are digital items. The Patreon also has some digital items as well. And then also you could maybe get someone in your life tickets to one of our upcoming live shows. We have a whole bunch of live shows coming in 2025. I've stuff booked so far through the beginning of May, and then we'll have shows later in the year. But so far, stuff through May is booked, and we are coming to Hartford, Baltimore, Richmond, Houston, St. Paul, Milwaukee, Des Moines, Chicago, Columbus, Cleveland, Montreal, and Buffalo. You can get tickets to all the shows at thenewsolympian.com/live. So if you need some last minute holiday gifts, we've got you covered. Now, about this episode specifically, there's a couple of things to note. First, there was one point in the episode where I say juicy mortal instead of juicy morsel, and I definitely meant juicy morsel. Also, there's a point in this episode where I postulate whether or not Frank's godly parent could be Demeter, completely disregarding that a couple sentences later he mentions that he doesn't know who his dad is, so it makes it clear that his godly parent would be his dad, completely
didn't recognize this in the moment. I do think I realized this in a future episode. It could even be the next one at the Boston Late Show. It might be the one after, but there definitely is a moment in time when I realize and make fun of myself for not realizing earlier that his godly parent can't be a goddess. Now, I mentioned the Patreon. I want to give a shout out to the folks who've joined most recently. And yes, this accounts for people who joined, and I should have announced your names in the mid-roll break of last week's episode, but mentioned the whole thing with my sister and the unplanned ER visit. She's doing well. The stitches came through beautifully, so all is good. Thank you to everyone who said kind words about that. But let's give a shout out to the folks who've joined most recently. So shout out to our newest God tier patrons, Kinsey Hamlin, Rye Hoskins, and Cecilia. And shout out to our newest demigod tier patrons, Shay Tallison, Willie Shakes, Usman, Riley Pratt, JT999, Tom M, Jennifer Gonzalez, Social Justice Cleric, and Kane Smith. And shout out to Spencer D, who upgraded to the Super God tier on the Patreon. Reminder, if you have upgraded your tier on Patreon and I haven't announced it, I don't get those notifications from Patreon anymore, so just send me a DM letting me know, and I will announce your upgrade in this section. Final programming note, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but there's not going to be a standard episode of the newest Olympian next Monday. December's a 5-Monday month, holiday season and all that kind of stuff. So probably not going to be posting anything. Might post something about the donation that we do when we take a week off. But if I don't post something there, I'll do the donation in the episode after. And I just want to thank everyone for listening this year. This year was a very fun year making the show. I posted something on Instagram about the Spotify Wrap, but there was a lot of new people finding the show. I think with the TV show happening, that helped. And a lot of people have listened to episodes at least once. People are going back and listening to old episodes, and people have been coming to live shows and supporting on Patreon and joining the Discord and talking on social media and following us and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's just been a really fun year making the show, and I'm so happy with the community that we have. It makes doing this so much fun. I love being able to do this as my job. I recognize it is a privilege and an honor, and I'm committed to doing this for years to come. And I want to thank all of you for another great year of it. So thanks. I really do appreciate it. Now, unless you're listening on Patreon, where you get access to ad-free episodes, you're going to hear words from a few sponsors make it feasible for me to be a full-time podcaster. Some of those ads will be run by me, and others of them won't be. The ones that aren't are inserted locally. So if you live in Houston, don't be surprised if you get an ad about the Houston Rockets, who are really fun. If you want to watch some fun basketball, the Houston Rockets, genuinely a very fun basketball team to watch. But once those ads are complete, we'll get back into this episode of The New Olympian.
All right. I hope everyone had a good intermission. I missed you all so dearly. Oh, that's good. We wanted for we're actually having a better time when you weren't on stage. Let's keep talking about this book where we're going to learn about Nico and everything. Ooh, backstory, fun. So Percy asks if they grew up together, and Nico says no, because he only found out that they were siblings recently. Says that Hazel's from New Orleans, which is a convenient half-truth that Nico uses to make it sound like he came across her in New Orleans and brought her to camp. Hazel tries to fit in as a modern kid, but freaks out whenever she sees modern technology. Thankfully, there's almost none at Camp Jupiter because of demigods and everything, but every now and then when she sees stuff, it boggles her mind. Nico says that there aren't many children of Hades, and Percy has the feeling that Nico has other sisters. And Nico says just one, but she passed. And then I had written in my notes, I was wondering why Hazel and Nico took the sibling thing so seriously, because I was thinking like other half siblings, when they don't have the same mortal parent, like they don't really care. But the difference is that there's so few children of Hades/Pluto that it's a bigger deal. So now that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, Nico's only ever known his sister to be one person, that being Bianca, and they spent like their lives together. They spent decades in the Lotus Casino together. Like, Of course, it hits a little harder, and it's also funny too when Rick is listing out all the different technology that takes Hazel by surprise. It's always funny to like remember when these books were written, because I can't believe this is like a dated reference now, but an iPod.
I know, yeah, it said an iPod.
I was like, when I got my first iPod Nano at Christmas, like. Geez, 15 years ago? Like, that was like the greatest day of my life. And now it's like, oh yeah, it's just on your phone.
Yeah, it's fun, the things, like even in the last book when it was the assistant had as a PDA, like a Palm Pilot. And it's like, oh my gosh, wow. So, Tristan uses a BlackBerry. Like there's things, it's interesting to see like what technology sticks and what stuff becomes obsolete within a couple of years. Now about Bianca, Nico says that he saw her spirit a few times in Elysium, but last time he went down there, she chose to be reborn into a new life, and now he'll never see her again. And I'm thinking, do I need a Bianca refresher? This is new information, right? Like, no spoilers, but like, is this something that we learned in the first 5 books? This feels different.
This definitely, at least rereading it, felt like a reveal to me.
That's what I was thinking. Like, this doesn't, and I kind of looked back just at like a brief thing of like what goes on with Bianca, but I think she just like goes up and she keeps coming when Nico's trying to summon her and stuff. But this sounded very new and different, and I was very intrigued to see if there was like actually a peek at stuff to come.
And it's a big deal too, because the idea of like that's permanent, you have to move on. One of my favorite movies ever is this film called, why is it escaping me now as I'm talking about it? Donald Gleason, About Time.
I was going to guess About Time just from that.
Yes, if anyone's seen About Time, it's a brilliantly made movie, and I won't spoil it, but there's a narrative technique in there that allows you to still communicate with a loved one even after they have passed. But there's also moments where that needs to come to a permanent end. There's a moment in the movie where it breaks my heart because it's like you really have to let go of something that you were forced to let go of prior. And Nico and Bianca, he was forced to let go of her years prior. But now with this added layer of like, no, she's been reborn and he has to be happy for her so she can have this new life. But also it means he has to let that full piece of him go. And I hope it's not new information because that like breaks my heart. I wish we got to like see Nico deal with that level of grief because grief is real. It's hard to process, and I don't want it to just be glossed over in one line.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is something that might get revisited if it is in fact a new thing and not just me like forgetting what's going on in the first 5 books. Nico continues, quote, "I was just lucky to find Hazel in New Orleans, I mean." Then Dakota murmurs, "Unless you believe the rumors, not saying that I do." And of course, and I love that this happens, Percy goes, "Rumors?" But then of course, Don the Fawn interrupts by yelling, "Hazel!" before any sort of answer can be given. Hazel is happy to see him for once because now she's not going to have to talk about whatever these rumors are supposed to be. And she's still happy to see him even if he's in a part of the camp where he is not supposed to be. When he finally gets to their table after cheesing it up the whole way through, he asks Percy if he's going to eat that. And Percy thought that fawns were vegetarians, so he's confused, but Don clarifies that he means his plate. He then sniffs Percy's hair and asks what that smell is. Hazel tells him not to be rude, and he says, "No, man, I just..." And then Vitellius pops into existence at the table, and this is bedlam. There's no reason why. It is so clear. No wonder Cohort 5 are the losers. Like, imagine this happening at the lunch table. Like, all these people that are not necessarily late to camp just keep popping up and up and up. Like, yeah, of course they're going to be the dweebs at the camp. So Vitellius scolds Dakota for allowing a fawn at the table, and Dakota is more focused on having dinner than keeping out outsiders from dinner. And what Don was smelling was that Percy has an empathy link with a fawn. Obviously, this is going to be a reference to his empathy link with Grover, fawn just being the Roman version of satyr. So it's very interesting. I had kind of forgotten that that was a thing, and I didn't know that it had a smell. But for him to pick up on it, very interesting. For more of the sprinklings of Percy's backstory to kind of be happening without him recognizing it.
Yeah, and the more we talk too about just these chapters, it really like reminds me that Son of Neptune, it's like a love letter to the Lightning Thief, because even just Don the Fawn like eating a plate reminds me of like the first time like Grover ate a can. Like little things like that. It's just like there's so many just parallels, and you know that's all great stories. They rhyme. They find a way to harken back to what launched them. But I love this like added layer of it's a new story, but hey, there's so much familiarity here. And even though we obviously know who Percy is and we know what he's going through, we also kind of get placed in his head at moments because there are these like familiar moments from his backstory where you're like, oh, if I was someone who is like suffering from amnesia right now, I would also see like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. So shout out Rick. He's great.
He's cooking. He's cooking. So Percy asks what an empathy link is. Don begins to explain, but then Nico tries to change the subject by suggesting that the group leave to give Hazel and Frank time to get Percy acclimated. He says that the rest will go to the Praetor's table instead to discuss strategies for the war games. And Dakota mumbles, strategies for losing? And I don't like that Dakota is being so like grumbly and down in the dumps and stuff. I feel foolish for guessing, knowing no information at all that he was part of the Seven, but I literally knew nothing. Vitellius screams, Death Boy is right, agreeing that they must talk strategy since the Legion fights worse than when they lost the eagle in Judea. And we'll learn a little bit about this in a second. Don asks if he can eat the silverware, so then Nico just grabs Don and Vitellius and forces them away. And this is something I was getting into earlier. We're getting a different side of Nico. Nico's now the comedic relief character, which is so different for brooding, emotions, hot topic, eye black, welcome to the Black Parade, Nico. Now we're getting Nico is the source of jokes. Wildly different situation for him. I love it. It's so fun.
And I think that comes from the fact that like he knows the answers. Like,
True.
He's
like
in the
us.
place where like he is guiding the narrative and giving sprinkles of like, I can tell you this now, but I can't tell you everything, and like wanting to tell Percy everything, but knowing that in order for the whole plot to unravel, he needs to keep some information to himself. He's kind of forced to evolve his personality a little bit, or maybe not evolve, but just show a side of him that he never really had the chance to before, because he was always the outsider, the outcast, and now he's like technically the captain in this book, but he just can't like wear the captain C that you would have on your jersey, on your SPQR t-shirt.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah, he's got to steer the ship without anyone knowing that he's at the helm. So he yells for Dakota to join, who wipes his mouth, quote, uselessly since it was permanently stained red. Dakota then shakes like a dog trying to dry itself and staggers away. And Percy asks, what's wrong with this guy? And Frank says that he's a son of Bacchus, the wine god, so he has a drinking problem. And Percy replies, you let him drink wine? And Hazel clarifies, no. He's addicted to Kool-Aid, says he drinks 3 times the daily recommended amount, and that paired with his ADHD is a bad combo. And then Percy is observing Nico some more and then goes, ADHD, you don't say. And I can just see this scene so clearly in my mind. Like, it's such a classic, like, looking over the booth, kind of staring at the person across the room thing. It's really great writing from Rick. And I don't really know what it is, but even this early on, this chapter in particular, it's just, I really like this book. I feel like I'm already liking it more than The Lost Hero. Not to take anything away from The Lost Hero, I just think it's, that book did so much world building and so much setup that now this one just gets to be really fun. And I'm sure it also helps to have some characters that we already know in there, but like, it's just such a fun read already. And I'm really, really enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, it's an interesting question about like The Lost Hero. We're going to a familiar place for parts of it. Like we're at Camp Half-Blood, but we're being led by 3 completely new characters. And now we're in a completely new place and we're led by, 3 narrators, and only one of them is a familiar character, but it's a character that we've spent 5 books with through his sole perspective the whole time. So it's funny that it's like going back to a familiar place, if you're with new people, can feel like world building all over again.
Yeah.
But going to a new place, as long as you're accompanied by someone like a Percy who has guided you through this whole world this whole time, it's like, no, it's not the vast unknown. Like, we're in good hands because we're with Percy.
Yeah, what's interesting is the only things that we don't know are like the particulars of Camp Jupiter, because even with the end of The Lost Hero, we know like the big things that make Camp Jupiter Camp Jupiter. Now we're just learning like, oh, okay, the fawns are like this, and the cohorts are like that. So the only things we don't know is like flavor text. So it's kind of like a less distracting situation. We're less confused, and it's more just like, oh, that's kind of fun, and then we just keep going.
Something else to build off on what you said too, Dakota being addicted to like Kool-Aid is hilarious, because I think this book was written in like 2011 or 2012. This is a long time before like the boom of energy drinks.
Yes.
And if this was written today, he would be like pounding like Ghost Energies
Monster,
or Red Bull, Monster.
yeah.
Like when I was growing up, like my mom would be like, stay away from like Monster was like, no, don't. And now it's just like,
I thought I was going
everyone
to
has an
die
energy
if I
drink.
drank Red Bull. According to my parents, they were like, it'll stunt your growth. It's bad for you. And I was like, my bones will break apart if I drink Red Bull. And I still like, I didn't have Red Bull until I graduated college, because I was like, the fear that Joel and Barb instilled into me of what Red Bull would do to my tiny body.
I have a hilarious anecdote based off of that. In 6th grade, when we were learning about Greek and Roman mythology in the context of like the Olympics and history and all that kind of stuff, we did a mock Olympic Games with my 6th grade history class. And me and my team decided, how are we going to win? But we'll all have 5-hour energies.
Oh, no. It's
because we were catered to on all those commercials. Every ESPN commercial was like 5-hour energy. And we were like, is it 5 hours of energy? Or is it a burst of energy that is the equivalent of 5 hours, like 30 minutes? And I drank one. And then at lunch, they were like, that stunts your growth, right? And I was like, I'm never going to grow. I'm 5'2". I can't do this right now. And so clearly I did continue growing. And that was, fortunately, I didn't stunt my growth from 5-hour energy. But yeah, if I was in Dakota's situation, maybe I would have stopped growing from just pounding 5-hour energies. Or
maybe if you
Kool-Aid.
never drank one, you'd be in the NBA right now. Maybe you'd be like 7'3" if you didn't have that one 5-hour energy.
Now I'm going to think about that for the rest of the show.
So Hazel says that most demigods either have ADHD or dyslexia. Then Percy asks, do you have ADHD and dyslexia? And Hazel says, quote, back in my day, they just called kids like us lazy. And Percy goes, back in your day? I love him. He's so fun. And it's true to his character. Like in the first 5 books, he always would ask direct questions. He never let anything drop. For him to continue to do so when people either run the risk of him learning about himself or revealing their secrets, he's always there to be like, wait, huh? And I like that Rick didn't shy away from Percy's character to make it easier to hide the secrets. Like, he, true to form, always asks at any sort of slip up, and it's really fun. Thankfully, though, for Hazel, Frank butts in to say that he wishes he had ADHD or dyslexia because all he has is lactose intolerance. Percy smirks, and then Hazel, as the narrator, notes that she thinks that Frank is cute when he pouts. And we've had Hazel saying that she doesn't like him that way. Okay, Hazel, sure. Frank says that the problem is he loves ice cream. Oh, Frank, my sweet summer child. That causes Percy to laugh and Hazel to join him. And Percy, always looking to help us, the reader, out, asks, okay, so why is it so bad to be in Cohort 5? And the reason he's asking this is you two seem great. I don't get it. So Hazel appreciates the compliment and then explains that aside from being a child of Pluto, she also wants to ride horses. And I was like, that makes her uncool? Horses are cool? I don't get it. If someone said they were into horse riding, I'd be like, neat. Percy asks if that's why she uses a cavalry sword, and she confirms and qualifies it as wishful thinking, because there's only one Pegasus at camp, Skippy, and the unicorns are only for medicinal purposes because the shavings from their horns are used in antidotes. Also, most Roman fighting is done on foot, so cavalry fighting is looked down upon. But my thought is, if you're on a horse, aren't you higher up? So wouldn't your fighting be looked up upon? But they look down upon it in the metaphorical sense. And that is the context of why she's not cool. So I get it. But also, I don't know, fighting on a horse sounds way cooler than fighting on your feet like a peasant. Percy, ever the lad, goes, their loss, which I love. And then he goes, what about you, Frank? And it's a fun dichotomy in that sentence to basically be like, Hazel, you're incredible. And these people are fools and they're missing out. Hey, Frank, why does everyone hate you? It's a great 1-2 punch. People apparently dislike Frank because of his admiration for archery. Again, seems cool. But unless you're a child of Apollo, and I'm guessing that is the Roman name, is this because of the Helios thing where like there's a separate, similar to Apollo god as opposed to like a Roman name for Apollo? Because we already had that introduced with Apollo in the 3rd book where there was the Helios and, is it Selene for the moon? And he was like our first inkling into that the Roman side of the equation exists. So I guess Apollo is Apollo at both camps?
That's a really good question. I've never like dug too deep into why the Roman gods were named the Roman gods. I've always just been like, oh, the planets. That parallel and all that.
Yeah. I will probably get into this with Dr. Moya in the future myth episode, or it might come up later in the books. But the Romans don't like the bow and arrow fighting either. Frank hopes that his dad is Apollo, but he's not great with poetry, and he doesn't want to be related to Octavian. And I am very interested. We haven't really had a narrator or main character be a child of Apollo. Like we've had Will Solace get like briefly mentioned. It did like one thing in book 5, and I guess Michael Yu, but like no one's been like a true important character we care about that is a child of Apollo. So if one of our narrators was from that, that'd be cool. We also haven't had Demeter. So there's some options for if Rick wanted to go in a different direction, because now we've clearly established Hazel, child of Hades, as a narrator. We could have a different god that we have a representation from be a narrator. So we'll see. I guess my guess would just be that he would be a child of Demeter, not because of any sort of clue, but just because of the fact that we haven't really met anyone except for Katie Gardner, and she's shown up like twice and has maybe said hi. Couldn't tell you anything about Katie Gardner except that her last name is Gardening. Ha ha ha. Percy says that he can't blame Frank for not wanting to be related to Octavian before complimenting his bow ability, recalling the way that he wrecked the Gorgons. Quote, forget what other people think. I love Percy. This is great. Such a good vibe. Such a great spirit. I love it. Frank blushes and says that he wishes he could, but the camp keeps trying to pressure him into being a sword fighter since he's so burly and beefy. He wishes his dad would just claim him, and Hazel feels sympathy and gets the sense that Percy does too for going unclaimed. Hazel goes back to Percy's original question, though, the disdain for Cohort 5. She says that it precedes them. She directs Percy to the empty pole, and Percy guesses, yeah, the eagle used to be there, right? And Hazel is shocked that Percy knows this, but Percy explains that he picked up on Vitellius incredibly heavy-handedly, making the point that their first loss of the eagle sounded like this huge Jason disgrace. So, Percy's guess is that the eagle was lost a second time and Cohort 5 is to blame. Narrator Hazel then says, quote, Hazel made a mental note not to underestimate Percy again. When he'd first arrived, she'd thought he was a little goofy from the questions he asked about the Feast of Tuna and all, but he clearly was smarter than he let on. And I don't think you should let silly questions detract from someone's intelligence or overall competence, because I ask silly questions all the time. And I would like to think of myself as intelligent, even though many people who listen to my podcast probably think I'm an idiot because I'm honest and open with myself, but I probably beat all of you on the SAT. So shut up. I'm a bigger nerd. Hazel informs that he nailed it. His guess is 100% correct. So naturally, Percy then asks, okay, so what's the eagle and why is it important? Thank the gods for Percy Jackson facilitating us as the reader to understand what is happening. Frank then does a look around to make sure that no one is listening in. And again, I can see this so clearly. Like he's sitting in the couch and he goes like, okay, so here's the thing, because they're not supposed to talk about it because apparently it's bad luck, which feels weird. Like, I don't understand like the sweeping of things under the rug being bad luck. That feels incredibly unhelpful. It reminds me of people not wanting to say the truth about Selena. Like, don't you want to learn from your past mistakes? I don't get it.
If we don't do that, Mike, we don't have a story.
That's true. Yeah, I think
we need a little Deus Ex Machina in this. And I also love too, like this is an exposition dump is what we're in the middle of, but it feels natural. Like like Percy's been kept in the dark for so long. He's now in a circumstance where he can get information and it feels like he's not like breaking the rules. And even though they're bending the rules by explaining it, like I said, it all feels natural and with the flow. The eagle thing obviously is huge because from here, like you said about the cover, this is when once this is established, it's like, oh, now we really know nothing. Right. It's the classic moment like when you're watching a movie or a TV show when you've seen your last bit of trailer footage.
Sure.
And now you're like, oh, the rest of this is completely unknown.
Yeah. No, it's very fun to get to that point. Now, to your earlier point about exposition dumps, I think that it's done well in the book and it's also done well in the TV show. There were some people complaining about the show being a little exposition dumpy in the episode when Percy is getting shown around by Luke and Chris Rodriguez. But I think that that's just natural for this sort of setting. When you're the new kid to a school or a camp, you ask someone else who's been there longer a bunch of questions. So like, yes, it's exposition dump, but it's one that makes complete and total sense. So I think it's totally fine for the book to do this, especially because we as the reader, like, we want to know what's going on. So when people are making all those complaints about the TV show, I was like, do you not want to get caught up to speed? I don't get it. I think that was just a complaint by people already knowing what's happening because they've read the books before, being like, we don't have to know this. Anyone watching this for the first time has to know this. It's necessity. So I think this totally fits in like with the fiction of the story. So Frank explains that the eagle is the symbol of the camp. It's a large golden bird. It's meant to protect them in battle and strike fear into their enemies. Every legion had one instilled with power. Theirs was from Jupiter, and the belief was that it had lightning powers because Julius Caesar nicknamed their legion Fulminate, aka armed with lightning, because of it. Percy says that he doesn't like lightning. Love that his anti-Zeus bias is still intact. Hazel says it didn't make them invincible or anything, and they lost it the first time way back during the Jewish rebellion. Percy says he feels like he's seen a movie about that before, and Hazel says it's possible because there's all sorts of books and films about legions losing their eagles. It's happened a few times, and eagles were so important that archaeologists never recovered a single one from ancient Rome. And I'm thinking, why is that? Is it because people always stole them? But we'll get into it in a sec. But then I was wondering, are we going to get an Indiana Jones-style Percy Jackson book? It's basically the quest for a lost artifact. Like, this could be really cool. Then, narrator Hazel says, quote, each legion guarded theirs to the last man because it was charged with power from the gods. They'd rather hide it or melt it down than surrender it to an enemy. So that makes sense as to why none have been found. Oh, I just thought of something. Would Hazel maybe like accidentally pull the eagle from the ground by being near it because of the gold bar thing? I wonder if that'll count. No one say anything. No one make any noises. I'm looking at the ground. I don't want to see anybody's face. Hazel says they got lucky the first time, but not the second time. Percy asks if they were there for it, and Frank and Hazel say no, they weren't. Frank explains that he's almost as new as Percy by showing his Probatio plate. He says that he arrived just about a month ago, so all this is now starting to make sense. He says that even though they weren't there, everyone has heard the story before. There was a huge expedition to Alaska in the 80s to try and find it. Hazel says their senior praetor at the time, Michael Varus, giving a bad name to Michaels everywhere, tried to determine the prophecy about the seven and the doors of death, thinking that it would bring glory to the Legion if he could figure it out and make it come true. So he talked with the augur, and the augur said that the answer was in Alaska, but warned him the prophecy is not for you. But he went anyway, which seems like a bad idea. He went anyway, and almost the entire 5th cohort was lost. Majority of the Legion's gold weapons went missing, as well as the eagle, and those that did survive did not have their wits about them and refused to discuss what attacked them. And I love that there is intrigue, and I also think maybe Chiron got to them. We know he can heal people and stuff, so maybe when he was healing them, he was like, you don't want to ever talk about this to anyone ever. It's too scary, right? So big reveal. We're kind of understanding what is at stake, what happened, maybe what we're going to see happen over the course of this book. A fun little thing to have happen.
Yeah, and I like the idea too of like pushing against a quest and the consequences that can come from it. We've talked a lot about like the echoes of the Lightning Thief in this book. That fact reminds me of like Sea of Monsters, where the quest is for Clarice, but still we're going to have Percy go along on the mission and try to like figure things out for himself. And obviously the quest is successful, but I wonder how different it would be if Percy forced himself to be like the actual person who got the quest from the Oracle. And obviously this is a little different because we're on Camp Jupiter's side, but I like this idea of like quests can fail when you push against prophecy. I think that's a very like new, interesting layer in the lore.
Yeah, I think it's something that's kind of been hinted at with Annabeth. She had mentioned at points, the harder you try and change a prophecy, the worse things get. So now to have like a true example of like, here is something that happened. He was warned. He did it anyway. It was really bad. It had future repercussions, all sorts of stuff. To have like an actual tried and true example of it says to us as the reader, okay, people weren't kidding. So then narrator Hazel lets us know that she knows who attacked them, which is very interesting. Narrator Hazel continues to have lots of intrigue. I'm wondering, obviously she went up there with her mom. Is it someone that they met when they were there? Is it someone that attacked her mom? Is it her mom? Like, did Gia convert her mom over to being evil? Which, I don't know. Very intriguing, but the fact that she knows makes me it's a frustrating thing because the chapter ends not long after this, and then you're realizing, okay, I got to wait for 2 more narrators. But the way that this book has gone, it's not just 2 chapters for everyone, it's 4 chapters. So it's 8 more chapters before Hazel might tell us who this monster is. Like, they might already be in Alaska by that time. So it's a crushing thing, the 4 chapters per narrator thing. Like, it's got its pros, but it's also got its cons when you have something like this where you're like, oh, I want Hazel to say it. And then you finish the chapter without her saying it, and you're like, damn it, I'm going to have to wait so long. And podcast listeners are going to have to wait 8 weeks? Or I guess, it would only be 8 chapters, so I guess it'd be 4 weeks. So, okay, just a month. That's not a big deal. Frank says that camp has been getting weaker and weaker since the eagle was lost. Quote, quests are more dangerous, monsters attack the borders more often, morale is lower. The last month or so, things have been getting much worse, much faster. So this very much feels similar to what we were seeing happen at Camp Half-Blood. Now I've got this happening here, similar boats.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier, too, about the shifting perspectives, because I never thought of it like that when you're reading this book of when we have multiple narrators at play, when we leave one narrator, you have to wait so many pages to get to their story again. It reminds me of like in TV shows or movies when the subplots are like more interesting than the main narrative. Yeah. And when you pivot away and you're like, no, we want to go back there. And honestly, it links to what they're doing in season 2 because news has come out that there's going to be a lot more Annabeth-centric scenes or Grover-centric scenes, especially because the characters are so displaced. We can't just have them all on screen at once because of just the nature of how Sea of Monsters is spread out. So I'm intrigued to see what happens when season 2 does finally air and we have like outside of Percy's first person perspective and not having to rely on iris messages to find out what other people are up to. And I wonder if there will also be that pushback of like, no, we really want to see like Annabeth's subplot right now. And like, Percy, take a back seat. First 3 episodes were dedicated to you. Like, it'll be interesting to see how it shifts around in a TV format.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I think they've got a lot of room to play in the space, and we'll see if they play in that space. Percy guesses that Cohort 5 took the blame for this situation, and thus everyone thinks they are cursed. It's Cohort 5's fault. Like, anyone in that cohort is bad, all of this. this is what he thinks is going on. And Hazel says that they've been outcasts ever since the Alaska trip, but their reputation improved when Jason became Praetor. And Percy goes, the kid who's missing? Percy, come on, man. There's got to be any other way to ask that, right? Got to be a little more delicate here. Frank confirms and adds that he never met him because he was before his time, but he heard that he was a great leader who practically grew up in the 5th cohort. He didn't care what people thought about the group. He worked to rebuild their reputation until his disappearance. And that feels very much like what Percy would do to the 5th cohort. So feels like those similarities between Jason and Percy as being good leaders and good dudes, that will, I think, help the 5th cohort. But yeah, I feel bad for them. Like, they had all this upward momentum. And Hazel says that when Jason got lost, that brought them all the way back to square one, because they're like, oh yeah, classic cohort 5. You finally have someone cool. He gets to this position of power. Now we don't know where he is and he's disappeared. So again, it's like just proof, like, you're definitely cursed. There's no way you're not cursed. Look at Exhibit A, Exhibit J, I guess. So Hazel then apologizes for putting Percy in this mess. And the next part rips. I just got to read it verbatim because it's so good. Percy sipped his blue soda and gazed thoughtfully across the dining hall. I don't even know where I come from, but I've got a feeling this isn't the first time I've been an underdog. He focused on Hazel and managed to smile. Besides, joining the Legion is better than being chased through the wilderness by monsters. I've got myself some new friends. Maybe together we can turn things around for the 5th cohort, huh? So good! That's so fun! What a vibe! I'm so glad to have Percy back in the mix. He's such a good sport. He's such a good spirit. He's exactly what they need. The pairing of the two of them with him is going to be so fun of a dynamic. I can't wait for them to see how competent and awesome he is when it comes to fighting monsters. It's so great.
Yeah, playing Percy and Jason off one another, like thinking about how Jason dealt with his amnesia in The Lost Hero versus Percy. Jason felt so out of place, and I wonder if that's just because we don't know him as a character. Because when you're talking about like his story and his arc and like how far he got the 5th cohort right before he was taken out, I feel like Percy made more progress at Camp Half-Blood than Jason did at Camp Jupiter. But I also wonder if that's just because we saw Percy's progress unfold over 5 books. Because that line from Percy is like way more confident than Jason sounds at any point in The Lost Hero.
True.
It's cool because we know Percy, and it's cool to see like aspects of the original Percy start to come back in. But like, we just hit like page 100 when he says that, compared to like Jason, like 400 pages in, being like, I think we did it. We're on our way.
Yeah, I think it shows a difference between Jason and Percy's approaches and then also kind of like their situations in terms of leadership. I think Jason has more pressure, right? He's got the pressure of his dad is Zeus/Jupiter. So he's already from like the king of Olympus. So he's got to deal with that. Then at Camp Jupiter, he was a praetor. So he's one of the leaders of the camp. Percy, though he's kind of like the most important person at the camp, he's not necessarily in a true leadership position. Yes, he leads the battle, but he really didn't want to do it until everyone was like, it's obviously you, Percy. It has to be you. So I think Jason maybe is someone who likes a little bit more control. He wants to make sure he's doing a good job. He wants to lead people well, feel like he's leading them in a proper way, whereas Percy has always been a roll with the punches guy. He's always just been like, I don't know, whatever, I'll figure it out. And that's exactly what the situation is. Percy's just thinking, I know nothing about me. I don't know, whatever. Let's go find this eagle. Sure, that sounds good. Oh, this cohort, everybody hates them. Let's make them love you. Yeah, cool, whatever. And I think that is just Percy's style. And I think it's fun to see more examples of, yeah, Percy and Jason kind of operate in similar spaces. And obviously they're like the two leads that have to be the exchange to make the prophecy come true, but we are seeing that there are clear, distinct differences in their personality, and you're exactly right. A big way that we can see that difference is the way in which they handle their amnesia. Complete different approaches.
Yeah, and it's also like Percy has always been the renegade. Like, he's always been like, the universe hasn't wanted Percy to succeed.
Yeah.
The entire time of his whole arc is like pushing against Percy, and that brings out a fire in him to push back against the machine. I feel like that's where his confidence comes from. While Jason, it feels like the stars have always been aligned for him. It's like, it's always been like, we have like big plans for Jason. We want Jason to succeed. And so when all that is stripped away, I feel like that's where that lack of confidence comes from. And that's what he has to build back to.
Yeah. So the horn blows, all the officers rise. Raina says the games are beginning. Percy asks if being the attacking team is good, and Hazel says the good news is they get the elephant. But the bad news is, and then Percy finishes, let me guess, the 5th cohort always loses. And then Frank slaps Percy on the shoulder and says, quote, I love this guy. Come on, new friend. Let's go chalk up my 13th defeat in a row. And, dude, you don't understand that Percy Jackson is about to save your team like LeBron James on the 2003-2004 Cleveland Cavaliers. He's going to come through and will this whole team to victory. You're going to be fine. But that is the end of chapter 8, which I have retitled, I Give the Newbie a History Lesson. Do you have a retitling of chapter 8?
Well, I was going to say that was a perfect opportunity to make a Tom Brady comparison in front of our Boston crowd.
Thankfully, I don't care about football, so I don't feel insulted by this.
Better chapter title. What comes to me based on that line that Percy says is like, I get my swagger back.
Oh, I like it.
Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
It feels like that's what it feels like at the end of the chapter. The fact that everyone is like, oh, we're going to lose. And Percy's like, no, we'll probably pull this one out. And it's like, you don't know anything. This is your first day at Camp Jupiter. And he's got all the confidence in the world, like the Percy Jackson we know. So I get my swagger back.
Yeah, I like it. All right, well, that is the end of this chapter, and that is the end of this episode for now. If you're listening, we'll take another little break, and then we'll come back for the Q&A.
Hey, it's Mike here one more time, just with a little break because it's a longer episode. We're going to take a break here just for more of those inserted ads, and then we'll get into the Q&A, which is a very fun Q&A. And also, just a little update, we have switched the hosting platform of the newest Olympian again, this time to one where I should be even more able to block out some of those weird sponsors. But if a weird, sketchy, doesn't seem right sponsor ever does come through, do send an email to thenewsolympian@gmail.com, and then I can tell my ad people to get it blocked. But we found a new provider who can get even more specific with the brands that we restrict from advertising on the show. So if you get anything weird, shoot me an email. We're going to be on top of it. We're getting that set up over the coming days and weeks. But anyway, you'll hear some ads now, and then we will close out with the Q&A.
Let's do Q&A. Woo! So, the first question comes from Ariel, who's helping out at the merch table. Hi, Mike. I have 2 serious questions and 1 goofy question, so whichever you prefer, I guess. Let's do them all. 1, in chapter 8, we get the first mention from one of the ghosts about fighting in Judea, which begins my list of, oh, Rick, did you have to, regarding Jewish representation in the series. So I was wondering if in the future you might do an episode on the way you did for Potterless. I think so. I think at some point, like with the Heroes of Olympus, I'm waiting to see kind of how it shakes out more in the series to see if it warrants it. Like, I feel like at some point I'll probably do like a Piper Cherokee background thing. I'll see how this goes. But yeah, a couple of references of Judea. I did also mentally note, like, should we do an episode about this? So we'll see how the history element of it goes. 2, here in Boston, there's a museum called the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which is basically a replica Roman villa in the middle of the city. Also has a lot of plants inside and the Gardner last name. Since I learned about it, I've been thinking there must be some way to tie that into the series. And I'm shocked that Rick, who lives in Boston, hasn't worked it in somehow. I guess it's not much of a question, but do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, it sounds cool. I'll have to check it out at some point. I won't be able to check it out this trip because my Amtrak train tomorrow is at 6 in the morning. So I have enough time to do these shows, sleep, and go back home to help out with the baby. But yeah, and you know what? Maybe there's still hope. He's writing those 3 new books, right? So I don't know if it shows up in the one that just came out recently. Maybe the next one they find a way to Boston. So all hope is not yet lost. 3, which Amtrak line would you associate with each character? Shout out to the Northeastern Corridor, which I took to and from Boston to Trenton while in college. So yeah, I mean, let's see. Percy's just got to be the Northeast Corridor, right? Like, it just feels like they're reliable, makes the local stops. Like, it's not necessarily the fastest, but it'll get you there. Man. I'm trying to think. I don't know like too many of the lines super well. I just kind of like take whatever train I need to.
I only know New York to Boston.
Yeah, and that's Northeast Corridor.
Yeah, I guess Percy.
Yeah, so that feels Percy. I feel like Annabeth would be the Acela because she's like, oh, I know the optimal way to go. And it truly, we're taking the Acela home tomorrow. So excited about it. Oh, it's going to be delicious. It just worked out that like the 6 a.m. Acela was like only a little bit more expensive than like the 7 a.m. regional. And I was like, all right, we're going in business class on the way home. My boss, me, is good for it. And then, I don't know, the only thing I would say is like, I guess Frank, for now, just because it says that Frank and Hazel, everything goes wrong with them, I will say that is like any line in the Midwest, because I'm such a spoiled New York boy. The first time I did a tour through the Midwest, I didn't realize that like the Amtrak lines there, it's like one train a day. It's wild. Like if you're trying to go from Milwaukee to Minneapolis, there's one train or like maybe two. There's like a 3 p.m. and an 8 p.m. and that's it. And I was like, what are you talking about? You don't have trains every 15 minutes? What is this place? So I would give it to them just because not as reliable, because if one of the train breaks down, it's like, cool, there's one other train. Awesome. So that would be my Amtrak situation. We need more Amtrak trains. Bizarre. The Northeast, we're so spoiled. It's so great here. Imagine if that was everywhere else. But we can be happy because we can take the Amtrak everywhere. And they don't check your bags. Yay! So, okay, perfect. This is from Alex. 3 p.m. basketball live show question. You're talking to the right person. Hi, Mike. I'm going to attempt to tie together one of your interests and one of mine. Given that Dwight Howard and other basketball players do well on Dancing with the Stars, who is an NBA player that you would like to see on the show, and which of our heroes would do the best at ballroom dancing? P.S. What socks are you rocking with today? These are New York Yankees spring training socks. Yes, I will be only wearing Yankee socks at these two shows. I got to do something. Yes, I'm wearing a Yankee shirt underneath this sweater. But I wore Yankee fans in the crowd. Nice. We have a team to root for tomorrow. But I did wear light blue and yellow to pay homage to the Boston City flag. So I did throw you a bone, but I also did a little treat for me. So, NBA players or Percy Jackson characters that would be good on Dancing with the Stars. I would say Allen Iverson would be incredible, footwork-wise, Dancing with the Stars. I feel like Steph Curry would also be very good, quick feet. Anyone that's just like, I feel, quick on their feet and agile would do well. JJ Redick probably would do really well. He does a lot of things where he's a guy who like runs around a lot off of screens and stuff when he played. So I feel like he would be solid. He'd definitely have the cardio for it.
He'd be a good Prater at Camp Jupiter too.
Ooh, yeah.
He's coaching the Lakers.
He's coaching the Lakers now. We'll see how it goes. And then as far as Camp Jupiter / Camp Half-Blood people that would be good at it, who do we think would be good at ballroom dancing? I could see Annabeth, because ballroom dancing to me feels like a mix between athletics but then also intellect, where like you have to know the steps, but then you have to like physically be able to make them happen properly. And I feel like she, with her like part planning, part good in battle mind, I think she would be really solid at doing that. Anyone else that we see dance? I don't really know.
I'd just like to see Grover on Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah.
Specifically, Aryan, he's just told many great stories about how he learned how to like walk like a goat, and it became second nature to him. Mm-hmm. So yeah, put him in some tap shoes.
Yeah. I also wouldn't be surprised if the Cabin of Aphrodite, if those campers are really good, just feels like that could be a solid like dancing type thing. So yeah, maybe Piper's really good. Maybe Selena would have been good. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities there. Okay. This one, the subject line is just Rhode Island, rah! From SJ. Hi, Mike and Liam. My name is SJ from Rhode Island, the superior New England state. I'll stay out of this one. I don't know. A fun thing about Rhode Island is one of our friends went to Rhodes, which is an island. I think it's near the UK. One of our friends who like lives in London did a vacation to Rhodes. And Kelly was like, where is Rhodes? And she Googled Rhodes, but it autofilled to like Rhode Island. And Kelly was like, ooh, yeah, it looked like they were on an island. Yeah, Rhode Island sounds nice. And then for like 2 seconds later, she was like, oh, Rhode Island. Which, like, it's not an island, so, like, fair. Hi, Mike and Liam. My name is SJ from Rhode Island, the superior New England state. My question is, if all the main PJO/HO characters were going to become cartoonified and have only one outfit that they wore every day, what would it be? Think Scooby-Doo rules, where whether the activity requires, the outfit morphs to fit. So, like, Shaggy's always got, like, something that's green and brown. Velma's always got something orange. Bonus, what would your and Liam's cartoon character outfit be? All right, so first, for campers, what are they doing? Nico, obviously all black. Thalia, all black. Like, black jeans, ripped, bracelets with the studs and everything. Nico's aviator jacket.
My dream fan cast that can't happen anymore because he aged out of the role, but Leon Thomas III, who played Andre on Victorious, I always thought he would be a great Beckendorf. In another timeline. And there's an episode of Victorious where like he's got his like dreads tied back and he's wearing like a gray wife beater tank top. And I've always imagined like that's what Beckendorf looks like. He's just hammering away at the forge.
Yeah.
Like been there for 8 hours, molding stuff. And yeah, that's my Beckendorf.
I've always imagined him having goggles either like on or like on the back of his head or like around his neck, and then always wearing a calculator watch. He just feels like a calculator watch guy. Like Beckendorf feels like a nerd. Like he probably really likes anime. Like he just feels like that to me. I feel like he would also probably have like some sort of cargo pants situation or cargo shorts, because that's good to like put stuff in. For me, Clarice like always is wearing like combat boots, camo pants, like baggier kind of thing like that, with like a, you know, cut sleeveless shirt for the Camp Half-Blood shirt. And then some people have like classic items, like obviously Annabeth's always going to have her Yankees hat and stuff like that.
I'll add in really quickly. It's a topical question because if you've seen any season 2 set photos, the color scheme that Annabeth and Percy are wearing are the same color scheme from season 1. Like Percy has like a greenish overshirt with a blue shirt underneath and jeans. Annabeth has like the purple and the blue and the gray pants. It's different clothes from season 1, but they're definitely trying to keep the same, like, each character gets their own individual color scheme.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool.
I like it. All right, now for our outfits, it would honestly probably be these shoes, a pair of like white jeans that I have. The joy of being a cartoon character, my outfits the same every day is they're always clean and like pristine and white. And then probably some sort of, depending on the season, like a sweater like this if it's colder, or then like a fun button down if it's warmer. I definitely have like some clothes. There's like a lavender purple like knit shirt that I've worn a lot before that's like a looks good in any sort of situation shirt that I would probably rock that like forever. Do you have a default outfit if you were a cartoon character?
Yeah. My roommate makes fun of me. He's like, "Oh, it's the default Liam Crowley skin." Like he's wearing the same thing every day. Jeans, a nice pair of Jordan 1s. Can I rotate the colors on the Jordan 1s?
Right, if you're a cartoon character, no, you just got to
Okay,
pick.
I have a pair of white and maroon Jordan 1s that I really like. So we'll keep those as permanent. And then a white tank top with a black short sleeve shirt over it. And then I'll throw on my Red Sox hat. Shout out Boston.
So this one is from Alicia and Tristan. Says, "Hi, Mike, big Kingdom Hearts fans and Hades the video game fan here. I'm curious what you think Hazel, Frank, and Octavian's keyblades would look like. Are you familiar with Kingdom Hearts at all?"
This is out of my realm.
You're fine. So basically, it is a Disney/Final Fantasy hybrid. And then a lot of people, like the main characters, are keyblade wielders, where the first one just looks like a sword, but it is in the shape of like a big old school, like key. So then there's all these different ones from the different Disney universes. So there's like a Pirates of the Caribbean one where like at the handle it's like half of a steering wheel of a ship, and then there's like a Alice in Wonderland one that, you know, they all look like thematic, and it's still roughly in the shape of like a key/sword, but it plays to the personality of, in this case, the people. So Hazel, I think hers would be like all made out of like precious metals and gemstones and stuff. So I could see like maybe some like rubies and stuff at the hilt, and then it's like gold down for the bar. Maybe it just looks like a big like gold bar or something. Frank, I don't know that I know enough about him at this point to say, since we really don't know like his godly parent and stuff, but maybe because he has the interest in bow and arrow, like it kind of looks like if you took a bow and an arrow and a quiver and you like turned it into like a sword. So some, you know, like repurposed, like it's a transformer. And then Octavian's just has to be made out of stuffed animals with like entrails ripping off. Do you have any other thoughts of what their keyblades would look like?
I guess Octavian's would be like the skewer at Build-A-Bear.
Oh,
like
yeah.
They have like all the different.
That's great. I love that. Okay, this one is from Claire, who's the 9-year-old reference earlier. She made me this friendship bracelet and then another little necklace thing. It's super cool. So the subject line is early show allowed me to be here. I got to start doing more 3 p.m. shows. This is great. Shout out. I saw like multiple people who were like younger, and that's so cool. So shout out to all of you. Shout out to your parents for being cool and bringing you to the show, especially if your parents have no idea what's going on. Shout out to those parents. And I will continue to not curse on the show so that you can keep listening and I don't have to feel bad about it. So it says, in the spirit of Gia, our Italian friend. Have you caught I'm calling Gaia Gia because the audiobook narrator calls her Gia. So in my canon, it's just like an Italian girl.
That is, I was wondering why you were calling her Gia. I was like, I feel like it's Gaia, but the pronunciations are always so weird.
The audiobook calls her Gia, so I'm just imagining her as Gia, G-I-A. So in the spirit of Gia, our Italian friend, what pastry/baked good would represent each Olympian? P.S. Have you been to Bova or any of the North End bakeries? I have not, but it sounds like I should try to visit those. So pastry and baked goods for the Olympians. I feel like Aphrodite just feels like a pain au chocolat. I think I'm doing this just because Selena Beauregard feels French, but it just feels like she would be like, oh, Paris, the city of love. So it's going to be like a croissant or a pain au chocolat. And then do seafood, if there was ever a place to do it, are there seafood pastries? Because that feels like Poseidon. If any place, Boston would do it. Lobster tail.
Lobster
but
tail
like a
would make
pastry?
sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
baked into. Okay.
I'm pretty sure lobster tail has nothing to do with lobster. It just looks like a lobster tail.
It's in the shape. Okay, I'm imagining like when you order like the actual tail of a lobster at a restaurant. I was like, for breakfast? Sure. Okay. And then I feel something spicy for Hephaestus, just like the flame of a forge feels like some sort of like spicy pastry, maybe like a cinnamon pastry, but it's got like a little bit of like the cinnamon heat, like when you have like big red chewing gum or something. So like a cinnamon twist, but it's a little spicy, maybe. I feel
Hades is some in dark chocolate.
you're right. Yeah, very like one of those like it's dark chocolate, but then also dark chocolate glazed donut,
like a fudge brownie.
Yes, it's like sits in your stomach. Yeah. Ooh, maybe something more fruity, probably for Dionysus. There's this really good pastry that I had when I was in Denmark. There's a reason why they call Danishes, guys. They're really good over there. But there's this like really awesome fruit one from this place called like Lankahuset, or if you're ever in New York, Olenstein. They have like their version of it. It's not as good, but they do the same one where it's got like this pureed fruit in the middle, and I think it was raspberry, but that feels like that could be something for Dionysus.
I don't know why I'm thinking of like flan with Apollo.
Ooh,
I don't have an explanation.
No.
It just
we don't
came to
need
me.
one. That's good. Oh, okay. This is a fun one, and we can end the show on this question. I guess this is only for me because you will know. So the subject line, the reason I picked it, the Red Sox suck and I want a Subway Series. I would also love this. My checkbook would not like a Subway Series because then all 7 games will be incredibly expensive, but it will be fun. Hi, Mike. This is from Beck. Do you think Skippy and Blackjack will become best friends, enemies, ... or lovers? So, yes, Skippy and Blackjack. I don't think that they would become enemies, even though Raina feels like she might be the Clarice of this sort of camp. She feels more friendly. We know she has some sort of questionable potential romance situation with Jason. So there's at least like something where we want to like Raina, I think, a little bit more than we want to like Clarice. Thus, I feel like Skippy is going to be someone we like. I could see them being friends. I would think that Skippy, because she's like the one Pegasus and, trotting around, cantering about, I could see it being a thing where Blackjack has a crush on Skippy, but Skippy does not have any feelings whatsoever towards Blackjack. Like the unrequited love of Blackjack's trying to impress her and win her over, and Skippy's just having none of it. So I could see that happening. Maybe they end up at one point together, but I at least feel like enemies is off the table, friends on the table, potential lovers, but I feel like Blackjack, fawning over her and trying to make things happen. I don't even know if Skippy's a girl. I don't know if this Blackjack can be gay, whatever. They're already trans, so whatever happens, I could see a romance situation with a power dynamic skewing in Skippy's favor. So that's the final question. That's the show. Thank you all so much. Give yourselves a round of applause for making it out to the early show. I very, very much appreciate it. Give it up to Liam for being an incredible guest. Give it up to everyone here at City Winery. There's a whole team behind the scenes, from like sound to hospitality to organizing. Like, everyone has been incredible. So shout out to the entire City Winery Bossy team for making this so smooth. Really do appreciate it. Oh, and shout out to Ariel for running the merch table. Thank you so much. Is it Ariel? Have I been saying it right? Okay, great, because it's like Andrea, which we all know I struggle with on the podcast. But yes, you can also check out merch on your way out, so you can get it on the way out there. But yes, I do have to like clean up my money gun related mess and then get off and prep for the second show, so I gotta go. But until next time, aside from a couple of hours from now, at some point when I make my way back to Boston to do another show, until then, I'll see you. Thanks so much for coming out, everybody! All right. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Newest Olympian. This podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Mike Schubert. I also run the social media and the website. Our editor is Sherry Guo. The music is by Bettina Campamontes and Brandon Grugel, and the art is by Jessica E. Boyd. If you love the podcast and you just can't get enough, there's a couple of different things you can do. First, you can go to thenewestolympian.com/Patreon. You can join the Patreon, and you can get access to a whole bunch of fun bonus content. You can also follow us on social media. We're at Newest Olympian on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. There's also a subreddit, reddit.com/r/thenewestolympian. And there's also the TNO Discord, Cohort, which you get access to by joining any TNO tier on the Patreon. You can learn all about the show at thenewsolympian.com, and you can get some sweet TNO merch at thenewsolympian.com/merch. I've mentioned the Patreon, so let's give a shout out to our producer level patrons: Kelsey Gillespie, The Damn Steam Nuggets, Vicky Garcia, Frida Vikstrom, Megan Moon, Sabrina Balsiger, Polly Burge, Nikki Harris, Tatiana Schmidt, Sandra Rose, Josh Sayer, Josh Wilkie, Abby Ryan, Marco Redhouse, Sam Reeby, Mrs. O'Leary, Milo Kim, Sandkoff, Rika, Ryla Matthews, Sky Mallory, Persasabeth, Aiden Parziani, Grace, Ginger Spurs Boy, A Cup of Solace, Bradimus Prime, Skylar Sisters, Scott Sheldon, Sophie, Natanya Page, Ann M. Thayer Cohen, Bella, Percy Jackson, Han, Haley Hingelheimer Schmidt, Catherine Sloan, Jessica Phillips, Haley Mary, Jim Jam Koopy, Kit Kat Crumbs, and Andrea, not Andrea. If you want to support the show in a non-monetary way, just tell someone about the podcast. It really does help a lot, whether that is you reaching out to someone directly who you think might enjoy the podcast. Maybe they're a big Percy Jackson fan. Maybe they've been looking for an excuse to read the books. Or if you post about the show on social media, or you leave us a rating and review on whatever podcasting app you're using. Truly, all of these things help. I really appreciate anyone who has done it in the past, and I also appreciate anyone who will do it in the future.
But I'm just so thankful that you tuned into this episode, and I hope you tune into our next episode, which will be on the first Monday in January. It'll be with Liam Crowley, once again live in Boston, and we'll be covering chapters 9 and half of chapter 10 of The Son of Neptune. But until then, I'll see you later. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's me, ASMR Mix. So as I mentioned, I'm recording this in Kelly's brother's room. There's 2 beanbag chairs here. I'm going to hit those. That'll be the ASMR Mix segment. Thank you so much for listening. This episode of The Noose Olympian is brought to you by Pretty Litter. Now, This episode of The Noose Olympian is brought to you by Pretty Litter. Now, we come to meet our interesting, I won't even say... This episode of The Noose Olympian is brought to you by Pretty Litter. Now, we all... This episode of The Noose Olympian is brought to you by Pretty Litter. Now, in Heroes of Olympus, we meet our, I won't say friend, I might just say enemy, Octavian. And Octavian, we know, does not do particularly well with stuffed animals. But if you want to do well with real animals, what can you use? You can use Pretty Litter. Pretty Litter is cat litter optimized. And you know that cats can be picky, and maybe your cat in particular is picky. But if you want to give your cat something... And we know, optimized. Pretty Litter's non-clumping formula traps odor and moisture. It is ultra-absorbent. It is lightweight, low dust, and 1 6-pound bag works for up to a month. And that can give you peace of mind. Pretty Litter changes color to indicate... And Pretty Litter can give you peace of mind because it changes color to indicate early signs of potential illnesses in your cat, like urinary tract infections, kidney issues, and more. Now, I recently gifted some Pretty Litter to Sherry Guo's family. Yes, our own editor, Sherry Guo. We sent some Pretty Litter to them, and they wanted to reach out to me specifically to let all of you know that Felix the cat wanted to thank Pretty Litter for such a fantastic situation. They love the litter, and they also loved the cat toys that came with the shipment. And speaking of the shipping, Pretty Litter ships free directly to your door. Directly to your door. You don't have to deal with huge litter bags taking up space. You don't have to lug huge tubs up from the store, either from your car or just from if you walk to the store like I do in New York. So makes it super simple, and you should give it a shot. Pretty Litter's amazing. You have to try it. Go to prettylitter.com/Olympian to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. That's prettylitter.com/Olympian to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. prettylitter.com/Olympian. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. So if you want to treat your animals well, basically the opposite of Octavian, you need to get Pretty Litter today.